Security forces are on high alert. The Electoral Commission is set to announce results of the October the 7th presidential poll. The election results are widely expected to favour incumbent President Paul Biya. Biya has been in power since 1982 and had put himself forward for a 7th term. The opposition claimed there was widespread fraud and voter intimidation and rejected the results even before they had been released. Legal attempts to have a fresh election also failed. Anglophone rebels who have been fighting for secession from the Francophone majority in a spiralling conflict boycotted the election. Well, on the 7th of October, millions of Cameroonians headed to the polls to elect a new leader. The man widely expected to win is incumbent Paul Biya, who's been in power for the last 36 years. CGTN's Robert Nagila profiles one of Africa's most entrenched leaders.
Paul Biya is one of Africa's longest-serving leaders. In power since 1982, his leadership style has been described as hands-off. In May this year, he held his first cabinet meeting after more than 2 years. Born in 1933, Biya was educated in Cameroon and France, where he studied law at the Sorbonne. He became Prime Minister in 1975 under President Amadou Ahidjo. In 1982, he became President following the resignation of Ahidjo. His party, the Cameroonian People's Democratic Movement, has won landslide majorities in every legislative election since 1992. In April 2008, Cameroon's parliament passed a controversial amendment to the constitution, paving the way for Biya to run for a third term of office in 2011. He went on to win a new 7-year term in a vote critics say was marred by irregularities. His repeated absences from the country have riled critics who accuse him of spending much of his time abroad. Back home, Biya adopts a low-key style of leadership, staying out of the limelight. The biggest challenge to his leadership are separatist militants from Cameroon's Anglophone regions who've been fighting for independence for more than a year. Back to you.
Well, earlier we spoke to Eugene Fongwa, a local journalist in Yaoundé, about the current situation on the ground.
The opposition did announce that they were going to hold demonstrations today to protest the election, especially if it doesn't go their way. Since last night or yesterday, there were few demonstrations that were held in the economic capital, that is Douala. But there's been a heavy deployment of the security forces across major streets in the big cities to preempt any demonstrations that are planned for today. There were reports earlier today that some officials of one of the political parties had been arrested and prevented from leaving their homes. But we will not know exactly how the public would react until the results are announced later today. The Constitutional Council is expected to start meeting at 11 a.m. local time. It will take a while for the results to be known. Until then, people are going about their businesses. Their troops located at strategic positions across the capital where I am. And there's a sense of tension when you speak to people. In Douala particularly, since last night, residents of the city have been complaining that the quality of the internet has been very dismal. That hasn't been the case in the city of Yaoundé, where the election results will be announced. Have had glimpses into the results that would be announced today. The deliberations of the Constitutional Council that spent the last week looking at disputes gave people a sense of where the results might be going. Because of that, the kind of expectation that we saw 2-3 weeks ago when the campaigns were still on, when the polling was still in the process, had kind of died down because people have a sense of where this is going. And so many people are going about their business from 11 a.m. where the Constitutional Council will begin announcing the results. We expect to see people gather around their TV set to follow these announcements live on television.
Well, that was Eugene Nfongwa there, a local journalist in Yaoundé. Well, for more on this, we're joined by CGTN's Sadiq Shaban, who has just come back from Cameroon. Sadiq, all the petition challenges have all been dismissed, all 18 of them. What does that mean?
It means now that the attempts by the opposition parties in Cameroon to challenge the elections that were held on 7th of October have now effectively failed, and the Constitutional Council has now have an opportunity to rule on the election results, which is expected any moment now. This is significant because these candidates and political parties had cited irregularities, voter intimidation, and the continued strife in the southwest and northwest Cameroon, which said prevented thousands of people from voting. We know there are about 970,000 people from about 4,000 polling stations in the restive Anglophone region. So all of this now appears to have been shelved, and the Constitutional Council says the elections on 7th as held will now stand as, legally and merit.
I was going to ask you about the restive Anglophone region. So the Constitutional Council has ruled. What exactly has it ruled about the elections there?
Well, it just said after dismissing the last two petitions yesterday by Maurice Kamto and Joshua Osei, these are the two leading opposition candidates who had gone to the Constitutional Council to say, look, thousands of people did not vote in this area, and they wanted elections, at least in those regions, nullified on these grounds, saying the military is there preventing people, from voting. But the Constitutional Council say, look, we may have a problem in that region, but those who turned out to cast their ballot will be heard, and that these elections in these regions will continue. So this effectively means that the Constitutional Councils seem to have downplayed the crisis in that area by siding, if you will, with the Cameroon Elections Body and the ruling People's Democratic Movement of Cameroon, which says the elections in those regions, in fact, were free and fair.
So, as you were saying, we are expecting the results any moment now. What next? Well,
it will mean effectively that Mr. Paul Biya will be declared the winner of the 7th of October presidential elections, and that all the 18 election petitions will now be legally thrown out. There will be no further challenge of these elections, and Mr. Paul Biya will now be the winner of these polls. He will head into his 7th term in office of 7 years. So that means also that the crises in the restive Anglophone regions are far from over, because these are some of the issues that the electoral body and the oppositions were locked in dispute. It also means that Cameroon will have to then look at the fallout from these elections and try to unite the country both from the Anglophone areas and the Francophone areas.
Okay, thank you very much for that analysis. That was CGTN Sadiq Shaban there. Thank you, just back from Cameroon.